welcome to yet another episode of the Black Archive Visual Podcast, episode 5, which is made possible by the Harvard South African Fellowship Program, run through the Center for African Studies at Harvard University. For exciting events and all things Africa at Harvard, I invite you to visit our website at www.africa.harvard.edu. Detailed information on opportunities for fellowships, funding for undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as exciting research and public engagement listings can be found on our website. I am Sisego Kumalo, your host, a visiting Harvard South African Fellow, and a lecturer of philosophy at the University of Fort Hare in South Africa, where I teach on social and political philosophy, feminist and queer theory, decoloniality, and the Black Archive. Today I'm joined by the wonderful Teddy Mazina, who was born in Burundi in 1972 and is a research artist in residence at the Africa Museum in Belgium. He is a photojournalist in political exile between Belgium and Rwanda. He defines himself as a photographer, activist, or artivist of memory. In 1993, he promoted nonviolence through creating the organization Youth Future with other students at the University of Burundi, an institution that fights against all forms of extremisms and political manipulations of the Burundian youth by the authorities. This political engagement forced him into his first exile in Belgium in 1995. After a few years, he went back to Burundi, where he realized that the contemporary history of his country is undocumented, creating a type of amnesia, which leads to everlasting reoccurrence of the same sociopolitical issues that the country has been facing since independence. Seeing photography as a weapon to combat collective amnesia, he decided to become a photographer to create a memory archive of the political history of Burundi. In 2010, he created Piga Pika, a movement for independent image in Burundi, a database of photographic images of elections distributed by local media to the Burundian people. His first book, Drums on Deaf Ears, it has a French title, which I do not want to botch. Drums on Deaf Ears, published in 2015 by Africalia Braxilis as part of his project studio Clandestine, or Clandestiny Studio, covers through photography the repression of political demonstrations in Burundi. The book was immediately censored in Burundi, and its publication forced him into a new period of exile in Belgium. In 2017, as part of the Film Festival of Human Rights in Geneva, Teddy received the Martin Ansetet Award for his engagement in human rights and freedom of expression in Burundi. He then began working on his photographic project Muzungu Tribes, which looks at the root causes of the reoccurrence of politico-ethnic crises in the Great Lakes region, his region of origin. The project examines and subverts the colonial photo archives, in which the colonial stereotypical gaze of African people has been used for colonial discourse and propaganda. As part of his research residency at the Africa Museum, Teddy extends Muzungu Tribes to his project My Name is Nobody, which studies the Belgian colonial photo library and the descriptive captions of colonial photography, which continues to influence our collective imagination and the continuation of racial stereotypes. And of course, we are going to touch on all of these things, but first and foremost, welcome and thank you for being on the platform, Teddy. I'm very, very interested to just start us off, interested in thinking with you about what it is that called you into photography and why you decided to go into this particular medium specifically.
It was an emergency. There was an emergency in Burundi, in particular with the situation that we've been living in. And for me, it was an emergency to have, to create like memory, a collective, our own, to tell our own stories and to tell what was happening at the moment on a daily basis, not when a catastrophe happens or when international media come and cover for a week and go. So for me, there was an emergency to tell stories of the people, what was going on in the country on a daily basis. And at the time, we just had a kind of conflict, post-conflict situation. And if we talk about South Africa, Nelson Mandela was involved in the peace agreement of Burundi.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were coming from a situation of a civil war, and looking at the situation at the time, you could sense, you could feel that something is going to happen again. So the idea for me was like, we can't go back into trouble without having like traces or having like a way to remember, to see the mistakes that we are making, and to have a chance to find solution tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a bit more about that post-conflictual situation, because I think, you know, all across the continent we have these stories, be it stories of military dictatorships, be it stories of, you know, civil uprising or civil unrest, be it stories of civil wars along ethnic lines. You know, your bio indicates that part of the work that you began doing was between the years 1993 and 1995. And in between that time, of course, we know that South Africa is transitioning out of apartheid into democracy. We know that we also have in that moment the Rwandan genocide. And these are the sort of big stories on the continent in that mid-1990s period. And we don't quite know, or not that we don't quite know, but there isn't a popular indication of some of the discourses that are taking place in other parts of the continent, specifically in the Great Lakes region between that time period. So do you care to share just with us a bit more about what it was that was the sort of post-conflictual moment in Burundi?
Actually, Burundi had
Many.
both situations that you were talking about. Burundi had like a post-independence crisis when they killed the hero of independence. So you have a new or one political party which takes all the power. We had uprisings based on ethnical division, killing part. We have exactly the same ethnies, or what they called. What actually we're going to come on that, but what have been called Hutus and Tutsis, and we had the same kind of conflicts or killings among under political revendication, if I can say in French, people trying to get into power or to protest by killing their neighbors. We started in the 60s, and I grew up. I was born in this kind of situation. I grew up in this kind of either dictatorship and uprising again, and killings again, and I started to be aware of the situation, and that's why I got involved in it. So the situation in Burundi was like either dictatorship or ethnical killings, people exiled, people trying to come back, conflict resolution, and going back to it. So that's what I call amnesia. It's like we've been doing the same mistakes every once in a while, and then that's how I started to do photos. Actually, it was like, I'm not gonna witness the same situation and stay home. So let me go out on every day and try to understand what's going on when people are repatriated, when rebel movements stop fighting. And so let's go and see who they are. Let's try to see what peacekeepers are. You know, like actually the South African army was in Burundi for a while. Yeah. So it was interesting to follow, but at the same time to save a memory. I still have pictures of that time, you know, and I was one of the first Burundians to go and on daily basis and capture those moments.
For sure.
And now what I have like archives, I'm not saying that it's huge, but it's precious because I can still tell someone what I saw in 2007. I can tell someone what I saw in 2009. I can bring the picture of this or that. It can help or not. It can help for justice. It can help for memory. It can help to find someone who disappeared, etc. So for me, it was important to, we as African people, me as a Burundian, me as a human, to say, okay, I'm born here, let me try to document and bring, to make a contribution. And I love photo as well. So, but I was doing some other stuff in photography, but the political and the social situation was the most important thing for me to document.
Absolutely. And on that note, Teddy, I'm fascinated by, you know, my initial introduction, and I'll be very honest with you, my initial introduction into Burundi as a nation, as a conception of a people, came through the cultural, one of the best exported cultural and celebrated cultural feats that you guys have, which are the Burundi drummers, the national Burundi drummers. And it's one of these, for me in any case, it stands out as one of those cultural archetypes on the continent that symbolizes post-coloniality, that symbolizes liberation, that symbolizes freedom on a number of levels, and freedom as we define it on our own terms. And so before we get into the sort of deeper socio-political questions and considerations, I'm curious about the role of culture. So for example, as you say, in your instance, you have used photography as a way of capturing some of the historic blunders, right? So as to facilitate a conscientization of the nation, right? So for me, that is a way to think of culture having a very, very strong and powerful socio-political role in terms of determining where the country is going. So I'm interested in that, which is to say, what has been, from your perspective as a photojournalist, but also as a human rights activist, what's been the role of culture more generally in Burundi? Because the public perception that we outsiders have is, yes, Burundi is an African country, and all African countries have their problems similar to South Africa, and some even more complex than our own. But there's the sense of a public perception through the Burundi national drummers that this is a nation of vibrancy, of culture, of, there's something about it. And I'll share even a secret with you that has always been a childhood thought, ever since I sort of fell into or stumbled into the Burundi National Drummers. I had this image in my mind of one day becoming a vice chancellor and a principal of one of the universities in South Africa, and booking the Burundi drummers to come and drum at my inaugural ceremony, right? Because of how amazing, the national symbol is in that instance. So I'm just curious about that, to say, how do you see that relationship between culture and politics in terms of forging the idea of Burundi as a nation, as a people?
There's two things, I think, that you heard and you've seen the Burundi drums when I see how you talk about them. But I will tell you why. You can't forget them.
Yes.
I think they are the only drum. Actually, I'm a player. I used to play. Now I'm getting a bit old to jump as they do.
Yes.
But I played during my exile in Brussels, I played for 7 years. On week basis, we've been traveling a lot with them. So as refugees, we created a group. And, actually, we bought drums which were blocked in the French custom somewhere. Someone called us. Someone have left some drums from Burundi, so we went. We took them back, yes, and then we played them for 7 years. So we rehearsed because we used to play when we were young, So we had like refugee drums, and they still exist in Brussels. The thing is, why you don't forget them is that the Burundi drums plays the heartbeat. It's the heartbeat. So whenever you hear them, you hear the first sound you heard in your mother's womb. That's why people never forget. That's why it takes everybody. That's the difference between the Burundi drums and
other drummers.
What you hear, you know it.
Yes.
But you don't know why.
You don't know where you know it
even
from.
Most of Burundians don't know that. But we have the same feeling. Whenever someone is playing, you stop. Because something is going on, So for what I can tell you about drums or drummers of Burundi is that Burundi came the legend or the myth of Burundi is that the country came from a drum. It's a long myth that I can't tell, but it came from a drum. You know, the first king of Burundi, who created the kingdom of Burundi, created it by setting up the first drum and playing it, and Burundi was born. That's how they say. And the Belgian colony, the German colony, when they came, and the Catholic Church, the first objective was to catch that drum. And we still don't know where that drum is, the first one, because it will still exist after like 400, 500 years. So Burundi was created from that drum, but today we don't know where it is. There's a lot of other drums and drummers. You still have families from, 300 years playing. They are still there. And that's where I was trying to capture. Maybe you saw that some pictures of them. So I went, as soon as I went back from exile, I rushed because I knew something was going on. It can disappear as well, as a family, as a culture, they call them sacred drums, Actually, the oldest man who was playing died a few years ago. He was old and he was sick, but he died poor. So Burundi drums are like what we have as a pre-colonial history, as a pre-colonial track and a post-colonial track. All powers, all different powers which came in Burundi try to use them. Change the colors they were wearing. All political parties try to use them, but you cannot change them, So, and it spreads. It spreads from the original families who were playing them, and then now it goes into schools. It becomes it's not common. It's not easy to play. It's not everybody who can play. Yes. It's physical. It's technical. And it's rhythm as well. You need to.
It is very physical because honestly, the dancing that accompanies it.
It's quite physical. But yes, it shaped the country, and it's the only thing that was not damaged. It saved an idea, a positive idea of that country, which is one of the poorest country in the world now. So. And there's no way, there was no way to use them for this or that or to make them disappear. They tried to destroy them since the colonization. The first white people who came in Burundi tried to catch the biggest drum of the country, the sacred drum, but it still remains somewhere hidden, I hope.
And in terms of, as you say, there's the pre-colonial function of the Burundi drummers, and then there's the post-colonial function as well. Is there a way, for example, in which, as a nation, and to a certain extent, I think I've seen some of this happening, right, in terms of some of the images, but also just, the footage that comes out of the Burundi drummers as a space. Is there a way in which, because part of what we're thinking about here on this podcast series is, can we use culture in innovative sociopolitical ways, right? And there are many objections to that, of course. Some people say culture is just culture; it's not political, and it can never be political. Last week I was talking to an amazing South African curator, Khanyisile Mbongwa, and we were thinking about the ways in which the aesthetic object in South Africa has always been depoliticized by particular people for particular reasons, right? And so I'm just sort of trying to think about that, which is to say, the Burundi drummers and the tradition of drumming survives the colonial encounter. Can it survive the post-colonial mayhem that defines the continent, right? So, for example, think about, and I always, make sort of reference to what we've seen on the continent, just down, near our neighbors at home. In Zimbabwe, Uncle Bob recently passed, and only now is Zimbabwe beginning to shift in terms of the ways in which it is deploying culture, the way that it is arranging its its political institutions of governance, etc., under the leadership of Emerson Mnangagwa. So I'm thinking about exactly those kinds of things, which is to say there are all of these cultural treasures that we have on the continent. And do you see, for example, the role of the Burundi drummers as part of that repository of knowledge that we have that can allow us to transcend particular rifts and challenges? As you say, Burundi faces a number of challenges. It sees social conflict, it sees ethnic conflict, but the one thing that I think stands constant for everybody, irrespective of the different lines that people are on, the one thing that remains constant is the fact that as a nation, as a people, Burundians have the Burundi drummers. So is that a way, as an artist, as an artivist, is that a way that you see the role of culture playing an active function in terms of facilitating social cordiality?
It's not even enough. Development itself. It's about to learn how, we have lost the rhythm, not the rhythm of the drums, but our own rhythms as communities. When you have a country where 200,000 people have been killed or more than that, or, every 10 years, you have lost something. You don't even know how to play drums. It's like you're killing the heartbeat, literally. So culture itself, I'm talking about Burundi, but we can talk about some other countries, you can look at Rwanda, you can look at some other,
the
places. The Congo, I always say that the Congo is a cultural power before it becomes mineral power or whatever. It's a cultural power, as you see how it spreads, So what do we do with that? What do we do with what have been left? And when we talk about culture, we talk about art as well. So art as an economy itself, as a new, what they call économie culturelle in French. But to rebuild people is to rebuild their identity.
Yes.
It's like a national identity. So how do we use the past? How do we use what have been left, like even paintings, even, drawings, even music, drums, etc., to give a new identity, not in opposition with the Western countries or Western culture, but how? Who are we? Who are we?
Yes.
Who are we? Who are you? Why do you? Can you dance your dance and dance other dances, or you only know how you dance like the others? Can you walk with your own rhythm? How do we walk? How do we walk? How do we work together? It can be seen like that. What have been left, and how do we? Why don't we teach it at school? What's the program? What's the school program? It can be drums or something else. It can be pottery. It can be so many things. But it comes into that. So that shapes a nation. That shapes a development program. That shapes collective identity, and art as a way of living or as an economy can grow through that. So it had to be seen in that context as a way to renaissance, to reborn. We can say born again. That the word can be used here. How do we born again? Because something have been killed.
Absolutely.
Someone wanted to kill something. And something have died on the way. And that's why you see we don't walk. Sometimes we run from the country. Sometimes we die in the country. Sometimes we steal from the country. Sometimes we work. Sometimes it works.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
We are depressed. It's all that.
And I want to just jump onto this without losing the train of thought in terms of our quote unquote script for today. But I'm interested in that. So at the moment I'm about to go home, right? So my time here at Harvard is coming to an end. and I'm about to return back to South Africa. And I'm thinking about precisely what you've just mentioned, in the sense of sometimes we run from the country, sometimes we stay in the country. And I'm curious about what the experience has been like, and the reason why I'm curious about this experience in terms of being in exile, because these are things, we think about exilees today, especially on the African continent. The association of exile is always, it's a sociopolitical exile, but a sociopolitical exile because we are fighting, an oppressive regime. But we never think about the real political conditions that force people into exile because of their political opinions, because of the work that they're doing. So I'm thinking about that to say, my own experience has always, I've always said to folks here, the reason why there's such a yearning for me for home is because I have home to return to, right? In the South African landscape, be it the socio-intellectual landscape, be it the socio-political landscape, I am comfortably ensconced in that space, right? So there's a concept in isiZulu that we call ukuhlubuka, right? Which is sort of this notion of being displaced, right? So it's a displacement either through famine, through war, through violence, through political ideology, etc., etc. And then there's the concept of ukubunguka, right? And ukubunguka is basically this idea of a sojourn that one takes into the world and sort of doesn't look back. And I've been sitting with these two concepts, and I'm thinking to myself, neither of these two relate to me, because there is a desire, there's this absolute desire to go home. So I'm curious about what it has meant for you to be in political exile in the contemporary age, to be censored by your own government, and in a way to not have the kind of access that you want to have, specifically because your work speaks so directly to the conditions of the people in Burundi and Burundians. And what does that mean to know that you're doing this work for people who might access this work tomorrow, right, in secret, via sort of stealing books into the country, stealing photographs into the country, accessing the work outside of the country through media that they might find either in Rwanda, either in South Africa, etc., or, for example, outside of the continent in general, right? So in Belgium, in the UK, in the United States, this is where people will freely access your work. What's that experience been like for you?
It was a choice. It was a personal choice, to take photo, as I told you, was an emergency. My father used to say, this country is amnesic. I don't know if we say it in English. This country is going to do the same mistakes again. And I understood it years later when I was taking photos, because I was obsessed also by memory. What are we doing? When you have like 3,000 ex-rebels packed at the same place, waiting for like $10 to go home. You send these people home without any like community work, any healing work, any like justice work. You send them home, they will come back, or they will take guns again and do the same. So I was obsessed by those mistakes which were done by the Burundian government, but also by the international community, which was like saying, okay, the process is okay, you guys, you go home, stop, drop your guns and just go home. It was crazy to do that. And like 5 years later, we went back into trouble, kind of. So it was a choice for me to take those pictures. I have friends of mine who have never done anything, so they're okay. They're still in the country. The economic situation is difficult, but they're still living in their house. They're cool. But me, I'm happy to not to be there, not to accept that the situation can go on like that. And the pictures I've made are okay. Now, journalism, like we have like more than 100 journalists who have left the country. I'm not the only one. So it was a choice, and as long as it has to take, I will accept the choice, If it changes, they call us back, we have contact with the people in the country. They say, we miss you guys because nobody's talking about what is going on. So
Yeah.
even for the next generation, they will know that some people said, we don't accept the situation, even if it was like not political uprising, not killings, but if it was like problems of economic or corruption, it's a choice that you make and you accept it.
Now, with that, Terry, I'm interested in, this image that we have up on the screen at the moment, whereby, as you say, you're thinking with the sociopolitical condition in Burundi. And you're thinking about, and it's also so fascinating, by the way, that, Burundi is in the Great Lakes region, sitting there next to Rwanda, sitting next to the DRC, and really what there's an outlier, if one can call it that, which is Rwanda, because Rwanda has Kagame, and Kagame kind of really just enforces this really, really intense and useful sense of stability in the country. And he also has a moral prerogative, right, both on the African continent but also globally, to say nobody will tell us as Rwandans what to do because the world abandoned Rwanda in its moment and time of need. So I'm thinking about exactly the situation that you're talking about. The situation in Burundi is bad. You're not necessarily too excited about it. And you have these series of images that you give us. The first one is the one that's up on the screen at the moment. I'm interested if you can share a bit about it, because this work speaks to the first sort of genesis, maybe if I can call it that, of, as you say, speaking back, revising this amnesic state of the state, right, of the nation, to say to folks, let's think about and let's think critically about what the nation looks like. So do you care to just say a bit about this image?
I love this image particularly because it was in the middle of the third mandate demonstration in Burundi against Nkurunziza, who wanted to stay in power. Now he's gone. And I was, it was crowded. Some tires were burning. There was the starting of police repression, which went very worse later after the failed coup. And this guy came out of nowhere and took this position in front of me, like, take me. And the picture was nice because it was very colorful. It was very it was looking like a warrior fighting for something, hiding his face as well, because people were hiding their faces not to be recognized later and be arrested, and etc. So it has something abstract, it has something universal,
but it also has something very specific
and very powerful as well, And it was reminding me the Chiapas, like, we hide our faces to let you see us, It was something like that. So for me, the Chiapas in Mexico say the same. So for me, it was telling me another story from another continent, but it's exactly the same. It's like we're hiding our faces to let you see us. So.
And that's such an interesting, and it is a very powerful claim of we hide our faces to let you see us, right?
Yes.
Because in us not hiding our faces, we are unseeable, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because so we do not mobilize physically, visibly. We do not mobilize unmasked. We have to be masked in order to mobilize. In order for us not to be victimized. In order for us not to be, in order for us not to be shunned, as it were, by society. And I'm interested in that because of thinking about the implications then in terms of staying change on the continent, right? So if we're thinking about how we want democracy, and democracy in Africa will look very different, for example, in terms of what democracy looks like in the United States. Because even in the United States, democracy is not working, if we're being honest. But I'm interested in this notion of we hide our faces so that you might see us, in terms of what does that mean in relation to establishing sustainable democratic principles all across the continent.
Oh, yeah, okay. So these guys who are fighting for the constitution, first, they are not illegal, they are not asking for, they're not trying to steal something in shops or whatever.
Exactly.
They are fighting for the constitution to respect the
rule of law.
The rule of law. That's first. Second, you talked about Kagame and Rwanda, which is the history of Rwanda have shaped the region itself, or shaped the mind, or creates like some people love Kagame, some other people hate Kagame. Exactly. That's a big problem. It's a big problem because Kagame have proved that things are possible
in
Africa,
the face of impossibility.
Yes, he asked for what was impossible, and they have done it. Clean ecology, women empowerment, protecting minorities. Every minority, nobody talks about that in Rwanda, like in South Africa, I think, like LGBT and others are protected. Nobody touches them. So there's so many things that Kagame does as a very modern and democratic republic that health care for everybody, now electricity for everybody. So is it democratic? Is it autocratic? It's a question. Does he have to open this or that? Maybe. How do you manage to make people victims of the genocide and their killers on the same hill, on the same village? How do you manage without a police? Do we have a police in Europe? Everywhere? Yes. Do we have a police in Rwanda? Everywhere? Yes. Do we have a police in some other countries where people are being killed? No. So it's Kagame is a complex. It's what some people want to see, and what some other people don't want to see. So on Rwanda, we're not going to stay on Rwanda because it's too complex.
It's too complex, yes.
Yeah, we can. No, it's not complex at all. It's simple.
Yeah.
Simple. How do we solve problems? Yeah. How do we solve problems? That's what you have done.
Yeah.
You have a problem. How do we solve it? So some people like it. And how do we make 1 million or 2 million killers live with families of 1 million victims? How do we make them live together? That's the main question of Rwanda. It's not there's no mystery in it, It's not about democracy or this. How do we make them live together without killing each other again? And they live together. You don't have 1 million people in prison. There's no 1 million people, so they live together. So that was the problem for Rwanda. So you were asking if...
So I was thinking about this notion of invisibilizing ourselves as a way of visibilizing ourselves. And this actually speaks to the second image, right, of the set of images that comes up in terms of your work, whereby, we're thinking about precisely... I'm thinking about this question of the sustainability of democracy.
Yes.
Which is to a certain extent what Kagame has, as you say, he has done it in Rwanda. Are there things that he is flawed for? Are there things that he is critiqued for? Sure, there are certain things that he's critiqued for, but he has achieved exactly what you're talking about, the unachievable, the absolutely unimaginable.
Yeah. All the prognostics were saying it's impossible.
And yet Kagame said, let it be. It will happen.
It's not Kagame himself. He says, I cannot build Rwanda by myself. It's Rwandan people. We are millions doing the same at the same time. So it's about, for the next picture, if I can talk about the next picture, it's all about hope. It's all about hope. How do we make young African have hope, or think that they can live a better life, work together, dance together, play together, create together, do business together, and trust their country. Going back to Rwanda, Rwandese people come and study and they go back. They rush home because they know business is going on and things are working. How do we make sure that African young people have got hope? They want to work home and come back home and join the journey.
And this is why, going back, I love that you say that, Terry. I'm so sorry for the interjection, but I love that you say that because, I'm thinking about, as I say, these two concepts that I find in isiZulu, which is the concept of ukuhlubuka and the concept of ukubunguka.
Ukuhlubuka is to live?
Yes.
It's like in Kirundi.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Gushibuka.
Yeah. It's this concept of sort of being forced out of one's place, ukuhlubuka, and then you have ukubunguka, right, which is also a concept of leaving, but leaving of one's own volition in the sense of I'm not going to go back. And it's interesting that you say that Rwandans, especially young Rwandan youth, say I'm leaving, but I'm not coming back. And I'm sitting with this feeling of I have left South Africa, and I'm in the United States. I'm having a great time, but God knows my heart yearns. My heart absolutely yearns for South Africa while I am here, and that yearning is precisely that. It's the idea that you capture here in this image. This idea of hope. This idea of there are a lot of things that don't work at home. But what is my role in making them work?
Actually, these guys are not dancing, you know. You can see that they have stones.
Yes.
So they are demonstrating by singing.
Yeah.
So they're happy because they have, together they have something they're looking for. But on the other side, you know, it's the last resort for them. We go out and we talk about what is going on. So and
we force a conversation maybe sometimes.
It's all about, in French they call it espérance. Espérance is the hope, the common hope, that you give people. Tell them, okay, you guys, everyone do his duty, and then we go. And then we are walking. It's the drums we've been talking about. It's the rhythm. Yes. Which rhythm? How are we dancing together? How are we going towards progress? You know, how are we walking? Or working or walking together? You know, it's all the same. So it's what is missing in some countries. That's why some people leave and they never come back because there's nothing left behind, you know, or they have been so scared or so
violated.
Yes. And the other thing, which we'll talk about, I hope that I'm working on the relationship, international relationship, is we as African people are not allowed to go where we want. We are prisoners in Africa. We are prisoners. To have a visa is a problem. So whenever you have one, you go. So most of the young guys, even when they have good life, they just want to travel and see Paris, only and come back. But there's no way. So in some countries, they migrate, become refugees. They call them economic refugees, but they can be freedom refugees. Freedom as to go, just to walk the world, you know. I go to Greece, I go to Spain, I go there, and I see the world. So even this is refused to them. So you have a mix of frustrations, which comes from in Africa itself, which comes from the bad governance or whatever, and the international governance itself. So they say, okay, you guys, you come from there, we will come to see you. See your elephants and your lions, but you're not allowed to come to us. So you have all those things mixing together, which creates like depression and and trouble, anxieties and violence sometimes.
Of course, but I'm curious about Teddy. So the first image that we spoke about, as you say, it's the idea of a man who says, "I am masked in order for you to see me." Right. This is a claim that's being made to the state. The second image is talking about a petitioning of what the country can become, a petitioning of what the country can be, a vision and the hope. I'm interested then in this last image in terms of this set of series of images. I'm interested in this last image, this third image, in terms of where do you place this one, right? So there's, I'm seeing a story here that we're stitching, a story of political franchise petition, people wanting to be involved in the sociopolitical landscape of the country, and also being involved in the decision making, and to make their voices heard, even if it means protesting as a last resort, but to make their voices heard. So, in the context of this image, how do we locate that in this broader discussion that we've been having?
This I was calling it the last resort. This guy, the situation was an arrest. Someone was arrested. There was a political leader that he was a member of this political party. So we spent all the day at the tribunal waiting for the prosecutor to say, is this guy going to jail or this guy is going to be free? And as a journalist, you stay under the sun, and you're sweating, and you're hungry, and you're thirsty, and etc. And
but you wait.
most of my
the day.
friends have left, and I was alone, saying, "Oh, I'm not gonna get any picture today." And then this happened. When he saw the car going with his political leader, he took his clothes off and blocked the whole traffic and said, "You're not taking him. As long as you don't tell me where you bring him, we don't know you bring him to prison." And the political leader had to come out and say to him, "Okay, it's okay. We are going to search my house, and then I will stay home. But the police come with me." So the guy left. But this is a kind of situation. This is what we can call democracy itself.
Yes.
The situation was not very dangerous at the time, but it was what I was trying to capture, because if you don't take this picture, nobody will know that it happened. It's an exercise of democracy, but in a different continent, in a different, in Europe they will talk about the feminine, these women, feminist women, and we have the same, but in some other contexts, with some other colors.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I'm interested in the there's the history as it plays itself out, because this is what I'm getting in terms of the work that you're doing with your photojournalistic approach. It's scoring of history, if one can call it that, to capture these moments of eruption, right? These moments of combustion, where people are petitioning for their rights, because people know their rights all over the continent. People know what it is that they're entitled to in a democratic state, supposedly. And I'm thinking about this notion then of this concept of inflecting history through photography, and contrasting that to some of the criticisms that film and photography have gotten since their inception. And you showcase this to us, by the way, this part of this criticism in a series of, in a short film that you recently did, where you stage a 70s style-based sort of setup, or you portray a 70s style-based in the contemporary, right? So 21st century, using this sort of 70s depiction, as it were. And I'm fascinated by how you would sort of hold that objection to say, yes, an image, a story, a picture can tell 1,000 words, tells a story in itself, which is one of the reasons why I was so fascinated in these three images, right? So the first is this image of this masked man petitioning for precisely this idea of being recognized and being brought into the polity. But that petition is happening from a place of, I know what the risks are, and because I know what the risks are, I'll mask myself with a cohort of others and sort of do this thing. The second, as I say again, is it's a group of young people who are sort of petitioning, and then of course you have a very clear and very stark sort of focus on a person who says, this will not in my name. It's basically a not in my name. And I'm curious about how you would sort of respond to the question, to the objection, to someone pressing you on the idea of, yes, an image can tell 1,000 words, but we saw from, USSR Russia, for example, whereby Stalin, Stalinist photography was always styled in very, very particular kinds of ways in order to portray, the supreme leader, Stalin, as this above and beyond. He erases, brushes certain characters out of certain images that he doesn't want. So how do you negotiate both the power, the immense power of film and photography in facilitating our capacity to step into particular moments in time and in history, but what we've also really seen with doctored images, doctored history, doctored film footage? How do you navigate that situation?
My role was not to create everything. instead of the next project that we're going to talk about, Muzungu Tribe, that is a setup that I've done myself to tell a story for some other reasons, and that I can tell you. What I was doing is to document what was going on at the moment. And as I told you, it was an emergency because today, these people, when they see these pictures, maybe they will say thank you to my camera. Not me, because but for being there with a camera. And so there are some other guys who have tried to do the same. But the idea to put them together and say, this happened. Yeah. This happened, or this guy's name was this, and they have tried this. This was important. On the other side, you can use photography as a tool, even of domination, of misinformation. But that's why I was not doing working for the government or something like that. Even if it was I had friends who were very wealthy because they were taking pictures of the president, but it was not my job. So you can use photography for some other reasons, but it's about a choice. It's your personal choice,
Now, does that say, because what I'm getting from you is to say it's not the art form, so it's not the film, it's not the photograph. It is the hands that produce it. So that's what I'm picking up, is to say, if, for example, you were a photojournalist working for the state, you would have very different ends in terms of how you purpose your camera.
Even angles.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? Whereas because you're an independent photographer, you have very, very different objectives for taking a particular image, or taking an image at all in the context of the sociopolitical condition back at home. Am I reading you correctly there?
No, if you have 5 photographers on the same sport, you can have 5 different pictures, but you are on the same sport. There is a reason why you go on the field in this situation of Africa. And I don't see myself like someone who can change everything, I see myself like someone who is taking part in the history, in our collective history.
Yes.
And to say something that I really like to say, to create a collective memory, which because pictures of Africa that we see in papers, you can see the same picture of Burundi like for 5 years in 5 different papers in Western countries. The same picture, because a photographer from Reuters or from AP came
and took
once
that
and
one
took
image.
that one, which was like miserable people, or which was like violence, or which was the president, but it's the same picture. So they tell our stories. While we can buy cameras, we're not going to use our cameras only for weddings,
Yes.
We can tell our own stories, have our own archives to come to your work, and tell our countries that if you don't do national archives, we're going to do some. We're going to try. We're not able to do it like, the government can do that, but we can save a bit of who we are on our angles, from the 5-6 different angles, but we will have something at least.
Yes.
Yes. It's like, pictures, family pictures that you have at home are so precious. Are so precious for the family, even, now we share them on social media, or on our telephones. You send to the whole family because you have the last picture or the last uncle that you haven't seen for years. It's exactly the same. It's who we are. It's who we are. Who we were. How we were. Who was this guy? So it's all that. So it's national archives, but again, it's identity. It's how we walk. What do we do? Where are we going?
Now, Terry, on that note, right, there are 2 sort of strands of thought that I'm getting from your work. The first really is a form of realism, if one can call it that, right? If we go into the theoretical sort of stuff, it's a form of realism to say, on the ground, in our communities, in terms of the socio-political condition, in terms of the landscape, the political landscape, these are the realities that our people are facing, drawing attention in to the Burundian situation, even, as you say, correcting some of the narratives that we find sort of being spewed by global reporters about the African continent, because we have the capacity. We don't only have the tools in terms of the cameras, we also have the talent, because your work is absolutely phenomenal, by the way. Just as a sort of frank statement there. But so there is the realism part of it, but then there's an interesting and curious set of works that you're doing, which fall under the work that you're presently busy with, which is the Muzungu project, Muzungu tribes. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Actually, where does it come from? And again, because the Bantu languages are so similar, whether you are in Burundi, whether you are in South Africa, when you're talking of Muzungu, there's a particular image that I have in my mind, right? In terms of what it is that is meant by this concept. So would you care to just tell us a bit more about what is the project about? Where does it come from? What is it inspired by?
So it was, it's the same like this one, but in another way. When I got to Europe for my second exile in my life, one life you experienced twice exiled. I couldn't take my camera because there were so many demonstrations in France, and it was maybe interesting to go the yellow gilet jaune, what they were saying. Should I go?
There are current demonstrations in France right
now.
Yes. Paris is burning.
I couldn't for a year. I couldn't take any picture because I was again exiled, thinking, what am I going to do now? I was documenting my country. I was talking about human rights, tweeting, talking about what was going on. And now it was, I was tweeting from far away, but no way to take pictures. So the question was, how our sub-region is always coming back with these ethnical problems, with tribal problems. That's why I talk about tribes, and I looked at Bazungus, who are, Muzungu means white people in Swahili, in Kirundi, and maybe in Zulu as well.
Yes.
So the question was, is there any tribes here for me? I went first from that, and then, yes, there were like modern tribes, There's modern tribes, there's modern community, how people wear, what people do, how they live, etc. So I started to explore the white community and try to understand how their democracy was working and without killings every 10 years. That was the first step. So it came to... I was trying to, and I fell, in my research, I found that there were some kind of hierarchy which had been created because I was looking at the picture archives, European archives on Europe and European archives on Africa. And I found that they have created hierarchies among white and black, but among black and black as well. Assigning us into an identity. They come, they find you near the river, don't know what, and they say, this is people from here, they're told like this, and they're called this. And they're cleverer than the next one, and they're more intelligent than the other one, but they're still, or they eat this, they eat that. So they assigned us into new identities. So they created categories and stereotypes that still affect us. On the ground in Africa and internationally. So the hierarchy between Europe and Africa have been created by photography at the time. The hierarchy between Africa and among them, have been created at the same time by scientific racism, by photography itself, and by the caption that they have done of it. So that's how the Muzungu tribe project started. So it was how to question that, how to talk about that. And it was before George Floyd at the time. It was before George Floyd. I was wondering how to bring it, how these measurements that had created the Hutus and the Tutsis, but which was done for Jewish, for some other communities, which led to all those killings in Europe or in Africa. So how to question it without coming with a kind of new demonstration of an angry, exiled photographer. So I went with Muzungu tribes, and I went back through fiction And Muzungu tribe was a fiction of a lab which was created in the 70s because they found archives, racist archives. So I wanted to talk about the racist archives, so I went through these students, African students and their white friends, who created this lab in Brussels and been caught by the police and expelled. That's also the story of Muzungu tribe. So Muzungu tribe was denouncing the colonial racism in the images and the colonial propaganda, which created problems between countries now, between continents, in the international policies, in cooperation policies, in migration policies, and in Africa itself with ethnical troubles, because we think that what the white man have said of us is still the same. So it's mainly that.
So do I understand you correctly in the sense that the Project Muzungu Tribes is a way of really putting up a satirical mirror to us to say, this is what you did by classifying, typologizing, assigning us to these categories?
No. It's not even a satirical mirror or accusing anyone. I just say, okay, we have this. How come today we still have the same stereotypes that you can find in the archives in our
minds.
Collective minds, collective memories. How come? What's the link between the modern racism, when you go on social media, and what is written in the archives, in the pictures? Sometimes you find the same words today. Africa against Africans, or Africa, Europe against African, etc. So you still have this influence of that history, that common history, which is sad, can be sad, but you still have that same influence. So this project is to go back, and my research is about that. The caption, what have been said, and how to bring it. It came from Muzungu tribes and this story of the 70s of those young African students in the middle of Europe.
Now, does the Project Muzungu Tribes, do you see it having the possibility or the potential maybe of dislodging? Because as you say, social media is, especially in the 21st century, you go onto Twitter and you might very well know this because you've got quite a sizable Twitter following. You go onto Twitter and you look at some of the debates that folks are having. They are very polarizing debates. They are very limited debates in the sense of people do not question, for example, as you say, where does this idea come from? Who was the progenitor of this idea? And when we begin to dig into the archives, you begin to see, it was at this particular time, it was this image that was taken on this date, classifying this people in this way, images that were then circulated, right? Circulated either as part of periodicals, as part of newspapers, etc., etc. So do you think that the Project Muzungu Tribes facilitates ways in which maybe we can counteract some of the historical, those historical roots of contemporary racism? Or is it a way of inviting us maybe to critically reflect on ourselves in terms of what it is that and how it is that we think?
It is, first it's art,
Yes,
How could I survive? How can I understand me? How can sub-region, the Kivu, the Congo, the Rwanda, the Burundi, etc. What happened? And it's in some other countries as well. How African people are becoming racism among themselves, How can't we travel? Why are we inferior in the eyes of some policies, some European Western countries, etc. Muzungu tribes is not going to change the situation, but it can question and can create art from it, It can maybe talk to a small category of people in general, because the speed of the news today, how many information we have through social media, and how many news specialists we have on everything, doesn't allow people to understand, to take time to understand. But there's maybe a way to contribute and question where those stereotypes comes from, how we can deal with them, and how we can create new kind of education in our countries, even in Africa. Let me talk about Burundi or Rwanda or Congo. Which programs are we going to teach our kids? Tomorrow, maybe not me, but tomorrow, we cannot take the same programs that we had since the end of the colonization, since the independence. We need to create new content for to understand our situation and our common history. So it's multifunctional, if I can say in French. How do we use all these tools that we can access? Because I work with the Africa Museum. Today I have access to 100,000 pictures, and I don't know when I will finish, but what I find today is crazy, because I'm doing the job of the Muzungu tribe lab. That's my work. So I'll go through it and see what they wrote on us. And what I find is sometimes even, it's not racist, because it would be easy for me to be angry. I'm not even angry anymore. You laugh on it, and it's crazy how they were considering what we were, the alterity that we were, like not even human. Not even human. So the last project, the sub-project of Muzungu tribe is called My Name is Nobody, because I was looking for names.
Of the people that are...
And nobody had a name on the pictures. They say a woman in the bush, say a man near the river, but this man doesn't have no name. But you have the name of the river, but you don't have the name of the person. You have the name of the elephant, but you don't have the name of the guy next to it. So it's all that. It's this treatment which has to be told, not by anger, but by, we need to research and analyze the archives that we've got from that time to understand them, and how do we use them now to reconstruct or to understand what is going on us, or what has been said on social media, or some kind of racism which is said in the politics in Africa or internationally.
And this brings me to the next image. And this image comes from the Muzungu tribe's project that you're doing. And I'm really, really fascinated by how these images are received by the communities that you're in conversation with, whether it be in Brussels, whether it be in Rwanda, whether it, in Burundi. I'm just curious about sort of the ways in which, folks will, because there are particular ideas around what these images are. They're flipping a very, very real. So you replace the black bodies with white bodies, and you replace the subject specimen, right, with a black body, and this is an image that comes from an 1870s lab, for example, an 80s, 90s lab, right, a 1910 lab, right, where I often think about the case of Psyche in South Africa, who is taken outside of South Africa.
That's actually the name of the lady. The series of this lady and this exercise is Sergi Bartman.
And it's exactly, the thinking behind it is that you have somebody who's uprooted from their community and is taken to Europe and has to live, find, and dies a destitute life of prostitution, because this is what, having had been sort of taken out, extracted, thinking about the concept of ukuhlubuka, right? Thinking, and that's exactly it. In the context of Sarki Batman, you see somebody ohlubukile, right? Somebody who has been violently removed from her context, and is placed into these weird alien conditions. So I'm just curious about that, to say what is the reception of the work that you're doing?
This is a picture of the Muzungu tribe lab. It's inside the lab. So these young people were measuring each other, but black people were measuring white people to prove that racism, like colonial propaganda and racism, was fake.
An invention.
Was an invention. So they were trying to put the race together. And actually, in this story, they created a new measurement, which was called the Ntu. coming from Ubuntu. On another picture, you can see them. It comes from Ubuntu, so Umuntu.
Yes.
Ubuntu, humanity.
Yes.
That's the fiction of my story in this. But in this picture is powerful because they touch her. They touch the body. So touching the body is, in the collective thinking, not allowed. Yes. It's not allowed to touch a white body like they do, to treat it like they do. But the project was to create a true story through fake news. Yes. And that's the second layer of Muzungu tribes, is what they tell us true every time. Because these people have been arrested, they have an identity, they have passports, they have everything. So they've been arrested and expelled. So you can't, when you read the story, you can't know if it's true or not. And I was questioning, say, the scientific racism itself, fake news, as as fake news, and contemporary stereotypes, racist stereotypes today, which comes from this period. So there's many layers when you read the story, and in general, people who comes to the exhibition, they look at the pictures, and they rush to Google to try to find this story in archives, because in archives, in Google archives, and they come back, they say, I didn't find anything. Can you explain me what is it? Yes. Anyway. Yes. But the thing is to prove you that what you see, even on the internet, can be fake.
Yes.
And the human zoo, and the idea that the black people, or even Asian people that have been exposed into the human zoos were, among a big fake news that we're going to show you how wild, how cannibals live, how this and that. So it's all this fake news which created modern racism and all the new policies on how they are poor, how they, say, let's send money every time to those people, this continent. It comes from the same place.
Absolutely.
It's the stereotypes that have been created on the continent itself, which is the richest continent. People, let's go see the Zulus. We want to see them in the bush. They don't want to see the Zulus in town. So it's all that.
And this, again, the next image that we have begins now, of course, to talk exactly about this notion of umuntu, right? And how, in a way, I'm even fascinated by that, because on the one hand, right, the labs of the 1870s, even of the 1930s, right, dehumanize. So think about going into the eugenics kind of spaces, in Germany with the Holocaust. You have a deep dehumanization of the Jewish peoples. Similarly with Africans, there's a deep dehumanization. And in these images, we begin to see, as you say, there's this particular inscription, and that's going to be the next image coming up. But there's the inscription of Ntu, right, derived from Ubuntu, derived from Umuntu. So I'm curious about that interplay, right, that you're having to say, yes, we're flipping the script, but there's an element of the humanization, even as other bodies, Jewish, black, were dehumanized. The work that you're doing sort of inscribes this concept of the humanity of these quote-unquote test subjects, right? So I'm interested in that play that you're doing there.
This lab was subversive itself. You tell the story of young people who were subversive because they saw archives. They say, okay, let's deconstruct this story. Okay, let's create a new kind of measurement. Let's prove that we are all equal, and let's prove that everybody have got a bit of Ntu in him, white, black, or whoever. That's the subversion is to be anti-racist.
Yes.
It's not being racist again.
Yes.
So they don't intervert. They do work together. They love each other. They're white and black together, and they say, okay, let's construct the story. That's why they are arrested. They are not arrested because they are trying to reverse the story. They are arrested because they are trying to deconstruct the archives. The archives, the racist archives, and the caption of the archives, saying that the pygmies are, almost monkeys, or the first step, the chaînon manquant. between monkeys and the human, you know, what you can read in captions is crazy, you know. So this lab was interesting at deconstructing all these stereotypes created before, but which have been so spread during the colonial propaganda and after, that they're still in our in policies, international policies. They're still in the way my immigration policies and so, you know, and you still have them in our permanent lives, and you still have them exactly in the civil wars, like in the sub-region I come from. People kill each other because the same stereotypes, because they say you are this, you are assigned to this identity, and you are assigned, even if you are married. People kill each other when they are married. During the genocide in Rwanda, people were killing their mother, or their kids. So they assign you to an identity, and you hate your own kid. So it's crazy. So it's this craziness that you need to deconstruct. Me as an artist, or as I was not able to be a photojournalist, I became an artist by force. You know, by force. Yes. I don't regret. But there's less tear gas.
Yes, of course, absolutely. And it takes me to the last image that we have, where exactly, you know, you begin, as you say, there's the subversion that's taking place. The persecution really comes from the subversion, having had subverted particular images and or particular stereotypes or ideas. And I think about this in terms of the concept of touch, right, that you were just talking about earlier, to say that what's different about this lab in its inventiveness is that it kind of transgresses particular embedded sociopolitical, socio-ideological sort of conceptions of what it means to be raced in a particular kind of way, right? Which body is touchable, which body is untouchable. And I'm curious then about, you know, what does it mean to challenge historical narratives through art? Because as you say, so part of what happens through your journey, through your story coming out of the Burundi context is that photojournalism is no longer what you have at your disposal, because and now you have to become an artist. You can't consign yourself to the category or to the remits of photojournalism anymore. You now have to become an artist. And even that, I'm fascinated by something here, and I'm conscious of our time. So I just want to sort of quickly touch on this. But I wonder what it's like to be a photojournalist, for example, an African black male photojournalist, finding yourself in Europe, right? And to find yourself in Europe, because, you know, part of what we've been discussing quite a lot in the contemporary university is to say, a lot of what we're seeing in the traditional disciplines of anthropology, for example, are changing. So Africans nowadays are studying Europeans and Americans and, you know, all of these metropolitan spaces, as these metropolitan spaces studied us through the anthropological gaze, right? So you have anthropological studies now, you know, students, et cetera, visiting these spaces and doing this kind of work. So I'm curious about what that means in terms of being a male, black, African photojournalist in Europe and flipping this narrative, right, in the sense of which bodies are touchable, which bodies are untouchable, who is seen, because also the white gaze tends to invisibilize itself in the sense of it sees black bodies, it sees brown bodies, it sees yellow bodies, but it is never seen. And what this image demonstrates to us, and what these sets of images the Muzungu tribes demonstrate to us, is that but we can change that story, and we can begin to see even the white gaze. We can begin to see the person who possesses the white gaze, not because we're trying to reverse a particular history, but because we're trying to humanize even the person that we are seeing. So I'm just, you know, I know it's a vague set of questions, but I think the first one is to say, what does it mean to be a photojournalist who has to then become an artist in Europe, because the photojournalism role shifts in a way. And how that sort of works as part and parcel of shifting the historical narratives that we have.
If I think Burundian, be a Burundian, like it's my country, it's my president who is, it's not enough. It's not enough because if you have the chance to travel, you need to question your situation. To question it globally. And can we live together with this heritage, which is difficult for all of us?
Mm-hmm.
So how can we question the past? Me, I became a researcher. I tried to research. I was just, being a photojournalist is much more easy than spending your days in archives trying to understand what was this mission? Why did them go there and not there?
Mm-hmm.
Why this guy is killing so many elephants on the picture, etc. It's like the narrative on animals in the pictures is crazy because people think that black people are poaching, but the colonial system have poached thousands and thousands and thousands of animals. So the question was to shift from the work. It's the same job. It's the same job. I was trying to set up a kind of photography memory of my life, the time of my life in the country. And now, because I'm in exile, I will go see what the narrative which have been said of my life, of my parents' life, of my past. So it's to question it, to try to see how we can live together. It's always, photography is still a pretext, which leads you to research and find answers for a few questions. You cannot answer all the questions, but you find answers for a few questions. Yeah,
absolutely.
And then you start to write, and you start to see and to write by taking some of the pictures, like I've done here. Yeah.
And Teddy, as a last and concluding question, I'm curious about what it is that you would like your audiences to take away from your work, right? So, and thinking about precisely the trajectory of what your work has been, starting off in photojournalism, getting into an artistry mode, but still kind of grappling with this exact same issues, really, around the human condition, the human experience. Somebody who's watching this, today, whenever today is, it might be that somebody watches this in 2025. They stumble on this episode in 2025 or in 2035. What would you like that young person or that person, whomever they might be, to take away from your work? And also, and more importantly, after answering that question, I'm curious about whether or not you have a repository where people can begin to visit your work and interact with your work. So those are the last two sort of questions, sort of outro questions that I'd like you to think to answer for us.
From my work itself is, do you remember something? Yeah. Does history teach us anything about us? Because amnesia is a common problem for many countries in Africa. When you talk to the new generation, maybe they don't even know who was there before. Even Nelson Mandela, who is known, maybe the new generation don't even know how many years he spent in prison, etc. So what do we remember? What do we teach? So if my pictures can help
in that regard,
and then can we question how absurd the differences which have been created by the stereotypes and the colonial propaganda and photography production. If I talk about my category of work, because I'm not pretend that I can, I use all the archives. No, it's not my work, but on photography, did I contribute enough to your knowledge of the few steps which have created assignment on identities in Africa, or violent identities in Africa? Can we find peace by understanding what archives tell us on the new identities which have been created by anthropologists who are half racist and half ignorant about our cultures, about our past? Can the political relationship between countries and continents change or be, can we ask for them to move from where they are and get out of those stereotypes? Let people move on the planet, giving the right, setting up the right exchanges, no more aid, because we humanity is one, how can we exchange, how can we help each other? What have been left by the years of colonialism and post-colonialism, what have been destroyed ourselves, when you've been talking about drums, what have we managed to keep, how do we use it for education? How do we live with our past?
And do you have websites?
It's coming. If you Google Teddy Mazina, but a new website is coming, but for the moment it's on Hangout Africa. Hangout Africa, Teddy Mazina, /Teddy Mazina, and you find it.
Thank you so much, Teddy. And really, it's a very, very insightful conversation. On this platform, we have a number of artists, curators, practitioners, writers. You're the first, as I say, photographer, photojournalist that I've had on this platform. And I have a lovely, lovely guest, later on in the series, who will also be sharing with us his work. Dario, and what his work has also meant in terms of using photography and image-making work as part and parcel of reimagining what is possible in the world. So I really would love to thank you for your time, and also just for the happen chance circumstance that has led to this conversation happening today. But for our viewers, please join us next week as we sit down with another one of our amazing guests and talk about everything that concerns Black life, from aesthetics to politics to education, and how all of that influences the ways in which we think about the future possibilities of Blackness across the globe. I am Siseko Kumalo, your host, and I look forward to welcoming you to another episode of the Black Archive Visual Podcast. See you next week.